And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
First graphic here showing flying weather for Wednesday morning. Good IFR, VFR, Arctic coast all the way down to Kodiak Island, North Gulf Coast, Bristol Bay, Nunivak Island to St. Lawrence Island. IFR here for the Aleutians, much of the Bering Sea, and a pretty good area of IFR across the southeast coast. And that shifts off to the southwest here for the afternoon Wednesday with VFR, northern and central panhandle, and good VFR holds here across all of interior Alaska, all the way up into the northern Bering Sea. Some marginal VFR now reaching Nunivak Island, edging in a little closer to the coast, but not quite making it. Otherwise, the Bering Sea, IFR, Aleutians as well, and the south side of the Alaska Peninsula. And then for the day Thursday, you can see IFR pushes right up to the southwest coast, marginal VFR reaching St. Lawrence Island, and IFR up into Prince William Sound, North Gulf Coast, back into the northern panhandle there, a little better to the south, and some marginal VFR here along the Alaska Range through the Talkeetnas. Otherwise, no change all the way up to the Arctic coast. And for Thursday afternoon, we've got IFR now well off the Arctic coast there to the north with VFR flying all the way down into southern Alaska here. Still some marginal VFR over the Alaska Range and Talkeetnas, with the IFR pretty well entrenched over Prince William Sound and the North Gulf Coast, northern panhandle, and also along the coast of the southeast coastal areas. Southern Kodiak Island, IFR breaking out to VFR up toward Kamishak Bay. IFR right along the coastline here in the west, up across St. Lawrence Island, and almost reaching Nome there, with pretty much IFR continuing over the Bering Sea and all of the Aleutians. So looking at the passes for the Brooks Range tomorrow, pretty good. And the Tuvik-Anadigan, both VFR in the forecast. Lake Clark and Merrill, VFR expected on all three passes of the western Alaska Range. Lake Clark, Merrill, and rainy. Windy as well. Eastern Alaska Range looking good. Isabel, VFR, Mentasta, and Tanita, VFR. Portage, VFR, and Chilkoot and White, VFR. Freezing levels here at about 12,000 feet, again over much of mainland Alaska, all the way up into the Arctic, and then falling back to about 8,000 feet as that upper low pulls into British Columbia there, 8,000 feet over the southern panhandle, and persistent low pressure over the southwest Bering Sea, coolest air aloft there about 6,000 feet. Icing, the only area of significant icing here, starting to push in toward the southwest coast with Nunivak Island seeing some possible considerable moderate rime icing tomorrow, back down to west of the Pribilof Islands, and this area north of the Aleutians, otherwise nothing significant elsewhere around the state. And the jet stream, still looking at north to south flow here. Northerlies just clipping the southern panhandle now at about 80 to 90 knots there as high pressure builds in over Yakutat and ridges up into the Bering Strait. Low pressure over the Aleutians out here, over the southwest Bering Sea. Pretty good strong winds around the Aleutians, 80 to 95 knots, southwest 80 knots right up into Bristol Bay. 9,000 feet, high pressure dominating the interior. To the north of the high there, westerlies is grazing the Arctic coast at about 30 knots. Otherwise, around this low, we've got west-southwest winds at about 40 knots out over the Bering Sea there, and north-northeast at 30 knots across the panhandle. And for 3,000 feet, light variable winds to the southeast coast, as well as much of interior Alaska, actually from the Gulf of Alaska all the way up to the Brooks Range. And then some westerlies at about 25 to 30 knots, just barely grazing the Arctic coast there. Most of those will be offshore. And maybe south 25 here in toward the Pribilofs, but really nothing enough wind to generate any turbulence, so nothing significant expected turbulence-wise around the state for Wednesday.